Hi, I'm Chester Wisniewski, Field Chief Technology Officer for Applied Research at Sophos. Today I'm presenting to you remotely. I'm sorry I was unable to attend the conference in person, but I'm glad to have your time today, and I'm going to talk about breaking Bad Multifactor, how hackers bypass our best efforts, and what we can do to stop them. I've been doing this for a while. I've been at Sophos for nearly 20 years, and what's really great about working for a company with such a large research organization is we get lots of data. And the data over the last couple of years has suggested criminals are adapting to our efforts to thwart them. As we all know, passwords are weak and people choose poor ones. We've started moving toward multi-factor authentication, and the information we have suggests that more and more criminals are willing to take the time and effort to bypass that multi-factor authentication if they can do it for a profit. And certainly that's happening. And in all my experience in the field, I think it's really accelerating right now. So it's something we need to focus on paying attention to. How are they bypassing it? What can we do to maybe slow them down a little bit? And in the best case scenario, maybe we can improve our authentication and apply the strongest forms of it where it's most important if we can't afford to do it throughout our organizations. So I'm going to talk in kind of three primary areas here. I'm going to talk about the primary multi-factor choices that you have out there and what weaknesses they have. We'll also go through a couple examples of when each one of them have been bypassed, and then a little bit about what we can do about it. And some of these things are policy-based, some of them may be choosing different multi-factor options, and in many cases, you're going to end up using a mix of things depending on what type of asset you're trying to protect or secure. So we've kind of seen a lot of progression. If you've been in the industry for a little while, like I have, you've probably seen this yourself. Multi-factor authentication is not a new idea. The idea here being that you have a secret, which most of us call a password or passphrase, and of course we add something to that secret that is hard for you to obtain. Secrets are notoriously difficult to keep, well, secret. So what do? Well, we use a token, or we have a second thing, your fingerprint, your phone, some kind of thing that you have to be in physical possession of in addition to knowing the secret before you allow someone to log into a system. And this is pretty basic, but there's lots of different ways to go about this, whether it be a biometric or a token or a card or something like this. And most of us have probably used many of these, if not all of them, in our careers as IT professionals or management. I think the most common one most of us use every day is either Face ID or a fingerprint on our phones and devices to unlock things like the screenshot there of a password manager. If you've been doing this for 10 or more years, you probably remember RSA tokens or equivalent tokens from other vendors that just changed a secret 6-digit code every 30 seconds. So, the idea being you combine that with your password and you have to be in possession of that token in order to get into a system. If you work in government or defense, you more likely might have seen smart cards, like we see in the upper right-hand corner of the screen. And smart cards, of course, have that same little chip on them, just like our credit cards do, or our SIM cards do in our phones. And that allows for them to actually cryptographically authenticate a login directly with the remote end. And we'll talk a bit about that more at the end, because that's a really important one. Some folks may have purchased or even been given at a conference something like what's proverbially just called a YubiKey, because it's become so ubiquitous of a brand. But what these really are universal second factor tokens, and they can do a lot of different things. They can emulate a smart card. They can simply do universal two-factor authentication. They can also store those 6-digit codes that we get in the Google Authenticator app that you see right next to it. You can actually store those seeds inside of one of those keys so that your Google Authenticator application is more portable, so you can use it on multiple different computers without having to copy all those QR codes and things around. And of course, more modern authentication, things like Duo or Microsoft Authenticator have become popular. Google and Apple offer similar things where you just get a push notification going, hey, is this you? Do you want to approve this login? Very simple, doesn't require any additional numbers or typing of anything. And of course, good old-fashioned cell phone text messages like you may have on your old Nokia phones. I mean, those are still in use as well. So there's a lot of different choices out there, but you can see some commonalities. And some of them use digits, some of them rely on some secure hardware, Some of them look at your biometrics, and others have been simplified just to be an app on your phone. So I think the most ubiquitous we see out there is usually referred to as TOTP for those of us in the security world, which is a time-based one-time password. And that's just those 6 digits that keep popping up everywhere. Whether you're getting them on your mobile phone as a text message, whether you have an app on your Android or iPhone, or whether you have a good old-fashioned RSA device, those devices all display a code that changes on a regular basis that allows you to authenticate. Now, the problem here, of course, is when we think about phishing attacks, the user's already been convinced that they're at the real website. And so those 6 digits could be given to the criminals, which of course would allow the criminals to authenticate as you. So that's kind of the biggest weakness here, is that those can be stolen just like a password. They may be temporary, but they're still something that you don't have to physically possess. And that does present a challenge. The benefit, though, is they're cheap to free compared to hardware tokens. So that's a nice option for low security applications potentially. Of course, biometrics, if you've got nice modern devices, are pretty good quality these days. And I'm not going to go through all the research. I have some of the information there on the screen for you. NIST in the United States, which is part of the US government that does a lot of testing and research, they've published research on all the different vendors, whether it be Samsung or Apple or things like that, on how reliable their biometric authentication is on their devices, and whether that be facial recognition, whether that be a fingerprint or a thumbprint, this type of thing. Generally, they're pretty accurate in perfect conditions. But in the real world, we've got to make them a little fuzzy, which does mean they can be bypassed. I mean, it's estimated that somewhere around 1 in 256 people might be able to unlock your fingerprint on your device by accident. Or if we're talking about facial recognition, it's much more likely that somebody genetically related to you very closely may be able to unlock a device that's using something like Face ID. And that might be a brother or a cousin or a child, where the genetic similarity is enough that it allows someone to potentially bypass the authentication. But if you're worried about spies getting into your device, then it's probably not really a big deal that your child or your brother can unlock your device. So but it's something to consider. With like any technology, there's certainly weaknesses here. Lots of people are using push notifications now. The 4 most popular being Apple, Google, Duo, which is part of Cisco, and Microsoft. I've got some screenshots of examples on the screen. They all take a slightly different approach, right? I mean, Apple just shows you a simple little map and asks you if it's you. Google similarly, although more techy, gives you an IP address and says, when did this happen and what kind of computer was it? Microsoft has sort of a second component to their multi-factor, where they ask you to input a number on the screen in addition to just saying approve. So that's a little extra layer of security. And things like Duo offer that as an option now as well. The default configuration of Duo you can see in the lower left hand of the screen, where it's simply mashing a green I'm okay button or a red this is not okay button. But in addition to that, there are some more advanced features and options you can choose to make the user think about what they're doing a little more than just mashing the green button. And tokens. Most of us can use our phones now as tokens. There's something called passkeys. If you go to passkeys.com, you can learn all about it. If you want more security, of course, that interactive authentication that you get from a smart card or a USB token or a Bluetooth token of some sort, Google Titan Key, YubiKey, these kind of things provide the highest level of security. You physically have to have the thing, and it's using cryptography. It's not just a 6-digit number that can also be stolen. So if we go through these notable failures, I mean, I think the headlines have been going on for years now, but they're increasing in frequency. So a few years back, SIM swapping was an issue, and Jack Dorsey, the CEO of Twitter, actually had his Twitter account taken over, which is pretty embarrassing, because somebody was able to steal his cell phone number by impersonating him and swapping SIM cards. And this has been going on more and more frequently, especially as people are protecting cryptocurrency accounts with SMS two-factor. It's well worth doing the SIM swap attack, even if you have a physical chance of getting arrested getting the SIM, because you're able to steal millions of dollars from these crypto accounts. So we kind of frown on SIMs or SMS authentication because of this, but as any kind of two-factor is better than no two-factor. So if that's all you can afford, or that's the easiest, most accessible thing, it's still better than nothing. Of course, RSA tokens have been around for a long time, and there's no limit to human stupidity for trying to bypass security measures, unfortunately. And I recall back, I don't know, 10 or 12 years ago, somebody actually outsourced their job to someone in a foreign country where they could hire somebody cheaper to do their job for them. And they required RSA tokens to log in. So they simply set up their webcam and pointed it at the RSA token. So, unfortunately, these 6-digit things, whether they're SMSs or even these hardware tokens, are quite easy to bypass if there's not some other mechanical interaction involved, some kind of biometric or a PIN being entered, or even PINs can be, of course, defeated if you share them with someone. So they're stronger but still weak. They're not as easy to bypass as a SIM swap. And this is happening quite a bit. Microsoft actually had an incident in summer of 2021. They had over 10,000 orgs that were being attacked through MFA bypass. And the way that this happened is the criminals set up a proxy that looked just like the real Microsoft O365 and convinced the user to enter the 6 digits. And of course, if the user already believes they're logging into Microsoft O365 and put their password to the phishing site, they're likely to go to their phone and get the 6-digit code and type that in as well. And that's exactly what happened in the case. 10,000 companies compromised in one go. So the criminals have really automated this. There's a lot of tools out there to do this cheaply and easily. And because of that, it's becoming more and more common to be phishing those 6-digit codes and nullifying that method of two-factor authentication. In Uber's third hack, Uber's been hacked a lot. I won't go into all the details. We don't have much time today. But in this case, they bypassed the multi-factor by using a fatigue attack. So in the Uber's case, they used Duo, and they kept sending one of the engineers at Uber a message saying, approve my login, approve my login, approve my login. And of course, your phone is beeping constantly, alerting you to another thing, asking you to log in, asking you to log in. And eventually the person got sick of the phone making the noise and simply went and pressed the green button to make it stop. And the criminals literally had sent them hundreds and hundreds of requests until they relented and pressed the approve button to make the messages stop coming through. And that's why having something a little stronger than that, where you have a couple digits involved, really slows them down, like the Microsoft screenshot I showed earlier, where you have to know another secret code to enter on top of the fact that you're getting the push notification. The two things together are stronger. And now, of course, we see cookie theft being a big issue. If you can't steal the token, or you can't fake the fingerprint or the Face ID or whatever thing it is that you're using for multi-factor, then the next best thing is let the user log into the real website and compromise their computer and steal their cookies. And this is also increasing. One of the famous incidents last year where this occurred was Electronic Arts had the source code stolen for FIFA, which obviously, considering the popularity of football, soccer around the world, was pretty embarrassing, if nothing else, and caused a lot of problems for them. And in this case, the criminals got onto an employee's computer and stole the cookie for their Slack login. And then they were able to impersonate that employee in an internal Slack channel and get the IT department to reset their password, which allowed them to gain access to the network. And Slack cookies are valid for 10 years, which is pretty odd, but that's how it is. And so we need to start thinking about how we can protect those cookies and making sure our endpoint defenses are strong, because even if our multi-factor is working well, if somebody's able to steal an authentication cookie, it does open another door, or at least leaves it open a little bit for a criminal potentially to enter your network. And there's tons of crooks in on this game, stealing cookies. Raccoon Stealer is one of the most famous ones we've published quite a bit of research on. But there's lots and lots of different malware families. And first and foremost, almost all of them now are involved in identity theft and cookie theft because it's so profitable. They may get cryptocurrency wallet cookies that allow them to steal cryptocurrency. They may get logins to Slack or your Office 365 or your Google Workspaces. Doesn't really matter. It's well worth stealing everything on the computer when you get on it, as soon as you get on it, because you might strike gold. And more criminal groups are doing this. And there's even marketplaces where they're selling them. So you can go on to places like the Genesis market on the dark web and search by company name, search by type of cookie you want to buy. You want a LinkedIn cookie, you want a Slack cookie, different types of cookies, and actually bid on them. And the prices are quite cheap. You can see in the screenshot here, some of them are 15 or 20 US dollars. So for gaining access to an enterprise network, it's quite a bargain. So what do we do about all this? I think the answer is we need to migrate most of our authentication to be using universal two-factor or FIDO or WebAuthn. These are all different names for pretty much the same thing. But the way it works, as you can see depicted on the screen, is there's a bit of a challenge response and some signatures and keys happening, right? Things can't be faked. If I generate a key to authenticate to Google, then nobody but Google will be able to read what that signed token is. If I give it to someone, it doesn't do them any good. They can't use it again because it's only good at the time I'm authenticating, and my computer will only surrender it to the website it was originally generated it for. No copies or proxies or machine in the middle attacks are effective against something like a hardware token, or even now what's being called passkeys, where we'll be able to use our iPhones and Android phones, if they're modern enough, in lieu of a USB device that'll do the same thing, where it's doing a cryptographic authentication that cannot be forged. And that's really the direction we have to go to solve this problem. Other checks you can do that don't cost much money or things to think about. You can certainly only allow devices that are issued by your company to authenticate and check device certificates. That prevents somebody from logging in unless they've stolen one of your devices, which really helps. The device health itself should be considered. Like, is it patched? Does it have endpoint security enabled and up to date? Sometimes you know certain IP ranges for certainly in-house employees that have to work in an office that you can restrict things to, and maybe don't ask for multi-factor in those cases. So those employees aren't slowed down, but people that are remote maybe have to. Watching for impossible travel is very helpful, meaning if I'm logging in from Singapore at the same time as I'm logging in from New York, something's probably wrong. It could be that I'm using a VPN, but these are the kind of things you should be watching for in your SOC, because that's not normal. And the same with an unusual country. Certainly with what's going on right now in some areas of the world, it would be very unusual for me to say, pop up in St. Petersburg, Russia tomorrow. And if that were to happen, that would be certainly a sign that something's probably afoul with my account at Sophos. Keeping those cookies shorter, Slack cookies are valid for 10 years. That means they have 10 years of life to be sold when they're stolen. So when you set authentication cookie timeouts, you can lower those down to more reasonable values so that if a criminal does steal them, they have a very limited opportunity to take advantage of that stolen authentication before it expires. And of course, modern endpoint security is designed to help protect cookies, passwords, and all these things, and certainly prevent the computer from getting an information stealer to begin with. And that's the best outcome of all. So I appreciate your time today. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter or Mastodon, or you can send me an email at chesterw@sophos.com.